సూపర్ ఉందన్న. చాలా బాగుంది. ఇలాంటి గిన్నె ఇంకోటి తెచ్చినా కూడా అయిపోద్ది. ఇంట్లో అమ్మ చేసినట్టు ఉంది. చాలా బాగుంది.
Welcome to the journey of Vishwa Foundation, an organization dedicated to bringing positive change to society every single day. In just 1,176 days, since its inception in May 2021, Vishwa Foundation has grown into a beacon of hope and change. Vishwa Talks is an online platform inspiring people to participate in social change by hosting experts who share insights on diverse topics every Saturday.
Namaste. Vishwa is an organization which works towards building the grassroots levels of India. The first step we take towards that is to build an awareness. We work in different causes from education, health, art and culture to 12 other causes. On every Saturday at 11 a.m., we have a talk on these various topics. For example, when it comes to health, India has a rich source of Ayurvedic treatments, alternative medicines like Ayurveda, homeopathy, Siddha, naturopathy. At a time when India is leading in diabetes, heart attacks, cancer, we have preventive medication which can be used. So a lot of talks have come out where people can use household items to prevent some of these or to control some of them. Our grandmothers were a rich source of information. Our parents knew a little lesser than that. And we know a lot lesser than that. And perhaps our children may never get that heritage. Here at Vishwa, we have people who tell us how to use the household items like curry leaves or neem or lemongrass for what ailments, etc. Similarly, we have talks on art and culture. We would like to have our Indians to be united, be one, be proud of their culture, their heritage. We have a lot of talks where people from various walks of life have come forward and spoken about various buildings, various dance forms, etc. These are two examples I have given. We cover 12 causes like this in our Vishwa Talks. As a first step, we want to bring in awareness among the coming generation. Our audience is across the country and sometimes abroad too. We have a rich interactive session after the talk is given by the expert. It's for any person who watches these talks to decide what they want to believe in, what they don't want to believe in, and if they have any clarifications, they're free to ask questions. After this, we want to build the skills of the people of India. Today, India is on the cusp of moving into one of the top countries of the world. But unfortunately, the skills of our people do not match our aspirations. Here at Vishwa, we started out in a small way. We started with computer training. Fortunately for us, Rotary and some people have donated computers to us. We teach 10th class students, inter students and degree students so that when they go for jobs, they don't get rejected. We teach the basics like Excel, Doc, ChatGPT, how to market. The basics we teach, because most of them cannot afford computers and they have no access to them. And similarly, we have something called celebrations. Celebrations is celebrating your loved ones on their anniversaries, on their birthdays, on their death anniversaries. You could contribute to any of the causes that Vishwa showcases on its platform vishwa.org. You could, Annadanam for instance. There are a lot of people across the country who, when they go to hospitals, they come up from far-off regions and they little money they have, they keep it aside for the treatment of the patient. They sleep on platforms, they hardly eat anything. And we give them food every afternoon on Fridays and it makes a lot of difference. There are similar such fundraisers. Please feel free to celebrate your loved ones with any of these causes.
Vishwa's commitment towards zero waste and the long way to go in achieving the goal begins with our material donation drive. Conducted twice a year during Diwali and Ugadi in Hyderabad, this drive collects clothes, books, toys and other used or semi-used items for the underprivileged. Contributions from over 615 plus families have benefited around 2,800 individuals, providing essential items and support, bringing hope and dignity to them. Through these efforts, we transform the waste of some into the treasure of others, promoting sustainability and community welfare.
A very good morning and welcome to Vishwa Talks. My name is Trishant and I thank you all for attending today's event on Zoom and to those watching on YouTube Live. For those of you who have attended a Vishwa Talk before, a warm welcome back. And for our new joinees, here's a little bit about us. Vishwa Talks is here to create awareness amongst people and to protect our social heritage and to let people make their own decisions. Here we invite experts to discuss and explore diverse opinions, different perspectives, various issues, problems, and their solutions on various fields including art and culture, healthcare, environment, education, and many more. So far, we have covered over 150 talks. Each webinar is an interactive session with a deeper understanding of the topic at hand. If you miss any part of the session or would like to go through the previous sessions, please visit our website or Vishwa Talks YouTube channel for a full library of past Vishwa Talks on various interesting topics. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar and to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speaker, architect Yashaswini Katiri. Yashaswini is an urban sociologist, architect, and founder of YK Studios, an inspiring research and design practice based in Hyderabad that boldly explores the intersection of space, society, and justice. With her rare blend of academic rigor and hands-on experience, she brings a deeply insightful and grounded perspective to questions of urban transformation. She holds a master's in city and regional planning from Pratt Institute, New York, and has worked with the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, contributing to climate justice and community-based planning in historically marginalized neighborhoods. Her global exposure and strong commitment to community advocacy has shaped her unique approach to socially engaged urban practice. Currently pursuing her PhD in urban studies at the University of Kent, UK, she has conducted immersive ethnographic research in Hyderabad's informal settlements, focusing on the nuanced interplay of gender, infrastructure, and daily life in the global South. Her work is not only scholarly, but also deeply empathetic, shaped by lived experiences and meaningful engagement with communities. Through YK Studios, Yashaswini continues to work across scales from interior spaces to broader urban systems, always centering people, place, and possibility in her designs and research. We are honored to have her with us today and look forward to the insights she will share. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to architect Yashaswini Katiri. As we dive into today's interesting discussions, I would like to inform the audience that our speaker will be taking questions after our main talk. So please leave your questions in the chat box or use the raise hand tool and we will allow you to ask your questions in person. I request everyone to turn on your webcam for the interactive part of the webinar. Kindly limit the interaction to questions. You can drop your opinions, perspectives in the chat box. So without further ado, let's welcome architect Yashaswini Katiri as she shares her inspiring journey and valuable insights into gender, infrastructure, and everyday life. Good morning.
Thank you for that, Trisha. Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, Vishwa Talks, for inviting me. I'm architect Yashaswini Katiri, trained and worked as an architect and urban planner for little less than a decade. But now I take up a different role as an urban sociologist. For my PhD, I've conducted an ethnographic study in an informal settlement in Hyderabad, or locally, what's called as a basti. I spent 6 months understanding how women navigate the city, not through maps or models, but through everyday acts of care, improvisation, and endurance. This talk is not about policy. It's not about what's written in planning documents. It's about what happens when these policies don't arrive, or maybe arrive too late. It's about what women do when infrastructure fails. We'll move through stories of waiting, managing, rerouting, absorbing, and continuing. And I hope by the end of it, you'll see that cities are not just physical forms, but as spaces held up by invisible labor of survival. So let me take you into those early mornings before the city has even woken up. Can you see the slides? Sorry, Rakesh, are the slides being played?
Not yet, just a moment. Rakesh, could you please share your screen? You'll be able to see the shared screen on your screen as well.
Yes, I can. Can
Yeah.
you go to the next slide, please? So let's start on one of those early mornings. It's still very dark when Sayama wakes up. The room around her is quiet. Her grandchildren curled up in a corner. Her daughter-in-law's alarm yet to ring. She slips on her rubber slippers, ties up her sari, and picks up two empty pots. One of them has a crack. She taps it in a tiny echo, like a reminder. It's 3:30 a.m. in the morning. She steps outside her hut, careful not to wake her grandkids. Outside, the street is still asleep. Dogs stretch, a streetlight flickers and dies. She doesn't look back. She has to reach the tap before the lines form. Because if she's late, her grandson might not even get water before school. She will be late to work. She works as a sweeper and she might miss half day's salary if she's late. This is her morning, every alternate day. This is the first act of the Basti, and no one sees it. We often talk about infrastructure as if it starts with engineers or architects. But in most cities in the global south, it starts with women like Sayama, and it starts before sunrise. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. We're taught to think of infrastructure as hard or physical systems, be it in forms of roads, pipes, flyovers, drains, tanks, and they are. But what if we looked again? What if infrastructure also includes the 3:30 alarm, the silence a woman keeps so the house doesn't wake up, the way she mentally calculates how many pots, how many stairs, how much time before the tap shuts off? Infrastructure is not just made of concrete and steel, it's made of bodies, of rhythms, of labor. And it is deeply gendered because when the streetlight breaks, it's not just the darkness, it's a decision a mother has to make. Should I let my daughter walk alone? When a water pipe leaks, it's not just a repair issue, it's an entire morning thrown off for a woman who will arrive late to work to clean someone else's house. So when I say infrastructure, I mean all of it, the material, the emotional, the invisible labor that holds a city together, even when that city doesn't necessarily hold her back. This brings me to my first big question. What counts as infrastructure? And more importantly, who counts when we decide? Next slide, please. So let me pause here and present the three questions that frame this talk. Questions that for me changed everything I thought I knew about urban areas as an architect, and that now guide my work as an urban sociologist. My first question, what counts as infrastructure? Most people will say roads, pipes, electricity, drains. That's the language of plans and budgets. But from the field, from lived experiences, I saw something else. Infrastructure is also time, is also waiting, is also fear, is also resilience. It's also the silence and the routine. It's the mother who skips her bath so her children can bath. It's the girl who memorizes which street corner to avoid after sunset. So, yes, infrastructure is physical, but it is also profoundly social and emotional. My second question, what does gender have to do with it? Everything. Because when infrastructure fails, it does not fail equally. It fails first and the hardest for those who carry the burden of care. And across informal settlements, that burden is overwhelmingly gendered. It is women who fetch, plan, absorb, reroute, and protect. So, gender is not a footnote to urban planning, it's a starting point. The third question, as you can see on the screen, what does everyday life teach us about planning better cities? I'll say simply, if you want to understand a city, don't look at its skyline. Look at who waits, who walks, who bends, who adapts. The city is not only made in offices, it's made in doorways, alleys, waiting lines, and dark corners. And if we don't learn from those spaces, our cities will fail the people who hold them up. This talk is not about what's broken, it's about what's being held together every single day by women who have no safety net, no spotlight, and still no pause. Next slide. Now I want to take you into the life of Bhavani, a woman I spend many mornings with during my fieldwork. Bhavani is in her late 30s. She lives in a small hut on a slope of the Basti, a settlement built along a steep hillside in Hyderabad. She lives in a one-room house with a tin roof stretched overhead, a drum of water tucked in the corner, her son's school books carefully stacked on a plastic crate. Bhavani works as an ayamma in a private school. It's 40 minutes away by shared auto. She's a single mother, caring for both her 12-year-old son and her aging father. There's no husband in picture, no extended family to fall back on. Everything she earns and every minute of her morning matters. But Bhavani's day doesn't start with her job. It begins with a wait for water. Her lane doesn't have an in-house tap connection. Like many other women in the Basti, she relies on a shared tap connection to a public borewell. It isn't metered, it doesn't run on a schedule. Some days it flows at 6 a.m., other days not until noon, and some days not at all. So every morning before sunrise, Bhavani steps out with her 3 large drums. She places them by the tap and sits down. She waits, sometimes an hour, sometimes 3. But here's the cost. If she waits too long, she'll miss the bus. And if she misses that, she reaches school late, or she has to get an auto. Getting an auto means an extra expense. Sometimes, if she's late, she gets a warning. Sometimes, a pay cut. So every single morning, Bhavani has to decide water or work, pay or pots. Now, she does have options, but none of them are easy. She can ask a neighbor to fill for her, but that's tricky. There's a silent moral economy around water in the Basti. If you borrow too often, people talk. They say, why can't she manage? Why is she always asking? For single women, the shame cuts deeper. Bhavani told me, people already look at me like I have no control over my house. If I ask them for water again and again, they will say I'm lazy or useless. So instead, she waits. And while she waits, she tries to make the most of it out of her time. One day, I saw her setting up a tiny tea stall, not a formal one, just a kettle and a few plastic cups. She sells tea to other women waiting for water. It doesn't earn her much, maybe 30 rupees or 50 rupees on a good day. It's not much. It's not about the money alone. It's about doing something with stuck time. This brings me to the larger point. We often think of waiting as an empty time, as idleness, delay, or nothing happening. But for women like Bhavani, waiting is work because it requires emotional endurance. That is, she has to decide, will water come today? It requires physical readiness to carry 20 liters of drum up a slope. It requires strategic planning because what if water arrives when she's gone? And it requires social calculation if she could ask someone for help without the stigma. This is not just inconvenience, it's a choreography of anticipation performed every day on a broken terrain with no room for error. And that's why I say time is infrastructure. In the Bastis, tap is only the beginning. Access is shaped by when the water comes and whether you can afford to wait. If you have a pakka house, a rooftop tank, an electric motor, you can store water and sleep in. You don't have to wait. But if you live in a hut like Bhavani, with no pump, no tank, no one to help, then your day revolves around the tap. Infrastructure then is not just about what exists, it's about who must adjust to its failures. So here's the shift. Infrastructure is temporal. It doesn't only fail through absence, it fails through erratic time. Waiting is not passive, it's labor, especially gendered labor. Women are the buffer. They stretch, delay, rearrange, absorb the glitches of a broken system. Bhavani doesn't just fetch water, she absorbs the uncertainty of when it might come. She delays her earnings, she silences her own discomfort. Because if she complains, people will say she's too much. This isn't just a story of poverty, it's a story of what happens when infrastructure is broken and the city expects women to hold it all together. Can we go to the next slide, please? But Bhavani isn't the only one whose day is derailed by broken infrastructure. Even residents in more formal houses, that is, pakka buildings with borewells, motors, and rooftop tanks, aren't immune. Deepti lives in a newly built 3-story house. She told me we paid extra for a second tap connection and we only get 30 minutes of water, that too at a very low pressure. That's because water pressure doesn't reach the upper floors unless there's electricity. And in the Bastis, electricity cuts are frequent. Without power cut, the motor doesn't run. Without the motor, the tank doesn't fill. And if you're a tenant, your access depends on when the landlord switches the motor on, not when you need it. Mangama, who rented a single-room house, explained, "We don't get to decide when the motor runs. Owner fills their tanks first and then maybe tell us." This is what I mean by misalignment. Water, electricity, housing, they don't fail in isolation. They fail together. A power cut delays pumping, which in turn delays cooking, which in turn delays preparation for school, which may delay leaving for work. And all of this together might mean missed wages. So in cities like Hyderabad, infrastructure is often partial, fragmented, and timed by systems no one controls. Basti residents, especially women, must constantly adapt to these shifting, unsynced rhythms. We can look into more such rhythms. One of them could be garbage collection, which is blocked by narrow roads. The GHMC truck doesn't enter the interior lanes of the Basti. The roads are too narrow, the bends too sharp. So waste piles up near doorways. Women end up sweeping and bagging it themselves, then dragging sacks up the slope to the main road. It's not just dirty, it's undignified labor made invisible. Another such rhythm could be drainage due to overflowing water supply hours. There's no separate drain line in many lanes. So when water is released, usually with poor pressure, the overflow mixes with sewage in the open nalas. On some mornings, you see children tiptoeing barefoot, black past water. The irony is brutal. The moment water arrives, the street becomes unwalkable. We could look into more such rhythms, transport, and timing. In the mornings, buses are packed. A lot of people, be it school workers, maids, vegetable sellers, all of them leave at the same time. They miss it, and their day begins with a setback. For women like Rafia or Bhavani, whose water supply clashes with this timing, the choice is brutal. Fill your pots or reach on time. And employers don't care why you're late. This is what scholars call syncopation, a jagged rhythm where nothing moves in harmony. Life becomes a patchwork of anticipation, improvisation, and compromise. Infrastructure here is not absent, it's just out of sync. And the burden of syncing it might fall on women, in most cases, every single day. Next slide, please. Now, let me take you into another story. Let me tell you Vijay's story. Vijay is a mother of 3 girls, aged 5, 7, and 9. She lives on the 4th floor of a building in the Basti, in a one-room rented house. Every morning, she bolts the grill gate from outside and heads to work. But before she goes, she gives strict instructions to her elder daughter. Don't open the door unless it's my voice, not for anyone, not even if they say they're from the school. I once asked her, what if something happens to the kids inside? She looked at me and said, it's all right if they cry inside when something happening outside. It's a chilling choice, but it's one that many mothers in the Basti make, because safety here isn't a right, it's a strategy, a daily act of calculation, improvisation, and control. Vijay made that decision after a 35-year-old man in the neighboring house tried to assault her eldest daughter. The girl was just 9. That story is now etched into their routines. Now, when Vijay leaves, she turns her daughter into a caregiver. The 9-year-old is instructed to watch over her younger sisters, to cook for them, to clean up after them, and to make sure they don't cry and stay quiet. She's not a child anymore, Vijay told me. She knows how to manage. I taught her everything. This is what care looks like under compulsion. When there are no creches, no safe neighbors, no extended family, you deputize your daughter. You ask her to grow up too early, to carry responsibility, not because she's ready, but because there's no one else. And this labor isn't isolated inside the house. It is shaped by what happens outside. Vijay's lane has no working street light. The pole stands, the wires dangle, but the bulb blew months away. At dusk, boys gather near the stairs, drinking, smoking, watching. Her daughters don't go downstairs anymore alone now. And if Vijay comes home after 6:30 p.m., she avoids the shortcut and takes the longer road, even if it costs her extra walk. Vijay said, they don't do anything, they don't say anything, but they look. That's enough to feel uncomfortable. This is what I mean when I say space is infrastructure, not just in physical form, but in its emotional charge as well. Fear lives in stairwells, shadows, side lanes, in the ordinary routes women avoid. And in this fragile choreography of safety, mobile phones play a double role. They're a lifeline in some cases where daughters use it to call their mothers to inform them they've reached, but they're also tools of moral suspicion. Vijay doesn't allow her eldest daughter to use WhatsApp. People start asking questions. Why is she always on the phone? Who is she messaging? Phones offer connection, but invite surveillance. A girl's screen becomes a battleground between safety and shame. All of this, locking children in, teaching 9-year-olds to cook, rerouting paths, hiding phones, this is not just mothering, it's infrastructural labor forced by neglect. Because when the city doesn't protect you, you become the infrastructure of safety, of childcare, of emotional buffering. Insecurity isn't an accident, It is built into space. Urban safety isn't about surveillance, it's about dignity. And dignity begins with the ability to move, to leave for work, and to trust your child will be safe, not because you locked it in, but because the street outside isn't a threat. In the Basti, women don't just avoid danger, they absorb it. They hold it in their legs, their roots, their routines. They make the Basti livable, not because it is safe, but because they've done the work of making it less unsafe. That's why I say space is not neutral. It shelters some and it disciplines others. And even in this uneven terrain, women are both cartographers and the buffers, drawing safe paths in unsafe geographies, holding the line when the state has long let go. On the other hand, in the evenings and nights, groups of men gather beside parked autos, smoking, drinking, chatting. Some of the autos are positioned cleverly, turned away from the road, shielding what's happening inside. You'd never notice what's happening inside if you're just walking by, but from the right angle, you can see it clearly. Men sitting inside the autos, drinking quietly. This isn't about alcohol, it's about how public space gets subtly reconfigured, how vehicles become lounges, how sidewalks become perches, how masculinity gets built into infrastructure of the street. And in that process, women withdraw. They walk faster. They call someone to come meet them. They avoid eye contact. They count the minutes till they're inside their house. Swati, who works at a salon in Madhapur, told me, I reach the Basti by 10 p.m. I call my husband from the bus stop. If he's busy, I just walk fast and don't look anywhere. When I asked her why she didn't take a better lit road, she shrugged. It's not about the light, it's about who's sitting there. This is how space gets measured, not by street names, but by stares, comments, and presence. By 7 p.m., the Basti folds inward. Children are called home, side lanes fall silent, fear moves into the space where light used to be. I was having a conversation with Sayaka on one Monday market evening. She was telling me, the light near the temple, gone 3 months now. My girl doesn't even go to the Kirana store anymore. They whistled at her, she came home crying. These are not random stories, but these create mental maps drawn from fear, updated through gossip, and passed down like inheritance. Every woman here carries such a map in her head, a geometry of caution, a cartography of silence. But here's what's powerful. Women don't just navigate the terrain, they reshape it through memory, routine, and care. Even in the absence of safety, they walk with keys between fingers, with stories behind their backs, with 1,000 recalculations, but still they walk. They're not just surviving space, they're holding it together. Can we go to the next slide, please? Let me now shift to the work of holding it in, of managing a household, a system, a failure without breaking. Let me get to the last story of today. Let me tell you Renuka's story. Renuka wakes up at 4:45 a.m. She doesn't use an alarm. Her body knows the time. She stirs in darkness and begins her morning routine, silent, swift, and unseen. She boils water for her husband's bath. She cooks rice, packs 3 tiffins, one for her employer in Jubilee Hills, one for her husband, and one for her 10-year-old daughter. She checks the buckets. Did the overhead tank fill up? Is there enough water to bathe her baby before she leaves for work? Then she folds the uniform, lays out the socks, oils her daughter's hair, and sets out. By 6:30 a.m., she's out of the door. But here's the thing, her shift hasn't even started yet. That begins when she reaches the employer's house, where she will wash dishes, clean floors, and she'll be told she's late even if she arrives at 7:02. What her employer doesn't see is that Renuka has already worked a 4-hour shift before she's even boarded the bus. And what her husband doesn't see is while she packs his lunch, she skips her own breakfast because her ration might not last till the month end. What the city doesn't see is that when water doesn't come on time, she's the one blamed, not the pipeline, not the municipality, it's her. At home, her daughter, 10-year-old, plays the second shift. She sweeps the floor, reheats the rice, feeds her younger brother, packs her school bag. Sometimes she even lies to her teacher that she's sick, just so she can stay home when her mother is too exhausted to manage it all. Renuka calls her a good girl. But what she really is a shock absorber for the failing system. And this is the argument I want to make. When infrastructure collapses, it collapses on the women's backs. It doesn't just break pipes, it bends bodies. It doesn't just fail to deliver, it expects women to fill the gap. And women do, with silence, with calculation, with compromise. They adjust their own bodies to protect others. They carry guilt for failures that are not theirs. They smooth the household, keep tempers in check, hold routines in place like a kind of emotional scaffolding. This isn't just care, this is infrastructural labor. And the city doesn't count it. It doesn't pay for it, but it relies on it. So next time someone says, she's just a maid, she just cleans floors, remember, she's already patched a broken city before arriving at your door. Next slide, please. Sorry, I see some questions in the chat. I will return to them after the presentation. Now let's step back and ask, what does all this tell us about infrastructure? What should designers, architects, planners, decision makers, grassroots, and even people of the city learn from the lives of women in the Basti? Number one, infrastructure is lived, not just built. When system fails, it is the women who absorb the shock with their time, backs, emotions, and futures. It's not just about taps and transformers. It's about who waits, who worries, who adjusts. Number two, gender is spatial. The city punishes women for moving, for resting, for working, for surviving. Fear, care, exhaustion, these are built into streets, shadows, hues, and silences. Design isn't neutral, it disciplines. Number three, planning must begin from below. Planning cannot just map buildings, it must understand rhythms. Infrastructure isn't just steel and concrete, it's also in plastic buckets, locked doors, and morning fatigue. What looks like resilience isn't often just survival without a choice. Next slide, please. So I grew up in Hyderabad for most of my life. I drove past the Bastis for years. I walked past them, but I didn't really see them. As an architect, I once thought in terms of lines, levels, sections, plans, elevations, and load-bearing structures. But studying infrastructure as a sociologist taught me something different. That what's invisible, waiting, fear, fatigue, they're as structural as the others. That the city's stability just doesn't come from concrete. It comes from the woman who hold it up when it collapses. The woman who carries the city when it breaks. The woman whose labor is absorbed, unnoticed, and unpaid. The woman whose life is rerouted by design and that doesn't see her. This talk is not just about infrastructure. This talk is also not about Bastis. This is the story of Rafia, who maps danger by light and sound, of Lakshmama, who came in the 70s and carved a home from nothing, of Bhavani, who wakes before dawn to go out in safety, of Radha, who skips meals to ration groceries, of Mangamma, of Deepti, of Anita Akka, so many more, whose names rarely appear in plans, but whose labor stitches the city together. I want to say one last thing. The stories are not side notes to infrastructure, they are infrastructure. Also, what I shared with you today is just a small slice of a much larger ethnographic project. Across my research, I explored everything from symbolic geographies of the Basti to rhythms of infrastructure failure, from state invisibility, caste-based exclusions to gender burden of care, violence, emotional labor. I also map how territorial stigma links to infrastructural neglect, how patriarchy is built into space and time, and how women, through solidarity, improvisation, and quiet resistance, keep life going. There's a chapter on NGOs and shadow governance, one on saving groups and coping mechanisms, another on girls who grow up too fast and mothers who carry cities on their back. And today, I chose to focus just on a few of these threads. All of these stories are grounded in the fieldwork from an informal settlement in Hyderabad and deeply informed by literature from the global south, especially feminist urban theory, sociology of infrastructure, and everyday life studies. If you're interested to know more about the full project or want to know more about the methodology or just want to have a conversation about it, please feel free to reach out to me. I would just want to close with one last statement. That is, next time we think about urban design, let's not just ask what is built, let's ask who's building around its absence and who's carrying its weight. Because survival here is not accidental. It's practiced, planned, inheritable, and profoundly gendered. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a really nice talk. Although all the stories were super painful, but it sheds a lot of light on how life is in informal settlements. Thank you so much, Yashaswini. Before we move on to the Q&A, we'd like to take 2 minutes of your time for a quick poll. This will help us get to know you better and tailor future topics that we bring to you.
Sure.
A big thanks to everyone here today. Your presence and participation means a lot, and it makes this webinar a success. I would also like to extend my heartfelt thanks again to our esteemed speaker, architect Yashaswini Khatiri, for sharing her invaluable time and insights with us. While you are filling up the poll, I'd like to mention you can visit vishwa.org's website. We have a fundraiser going on, which is an Annadanam campaign. We provide food at outside two cancer specialty hospitals, Basavatarkam and NIMS, where people travel from far off places in the city, and generally they spend a lot on the treatments for their relatives, so they end up staying on the streets, on the sidewalks. So a lot of different NGOs in Hyderabad provides them with food, and we do that on Fridays. You can choose to contribute or share the fundraiser with people who would like to contribute. I request everyone to answer the poll real quick so that we can move on with the Q&A. Okay, so how do you usually define urban infrastructure? People are saying system that supports daily life and community needs.
Yeah.
Who do you think is most affected by poor urban infrastructure? Low-income families is the highest answered option. Okay. See, some people are still answering. Okay, we can just move on to the Q&A while people are still answering. I'd like to first bring up a question from Vijay. A very naive question when the time is right for you to answer. As the city expands, what is evolutionary cycle of a new basti and how infrastructure evolves to support these bastis, especially these are unofficial residential areas?
So that's a great question. So I would say definitely with the kind of expansion our cities are going through, and there is more projected growth, and our cities are not ready for the number of busties that could evolve. And also, if we see a pattern, we do observe every time there is an expansion in the formal area, be it a new community, new construction, a small informal area is at least set up for a smaller period. And some of these infrastructures sometimes are temporary. I mean, people built around the kind of employment, let's say it's around a construction site. So somebody owning the construction project would help them with the infrastructure. But in most cases, they end up staying for much, much longer. And like most of you know, that slums are notified and non-notified. So to get for it to become a notified slum, it goes through a process, a couple of years, and it's a larger process. So that is the challenge. There is an infrastructural gap for any kind of a settlement, and in the beginning, it's usually the people of the settlement that try to get these connections, sometimes through local connections, sometimes through the kind of connections they have with local political parties, or sometimes even just through favors that they get from their employers. So that's how they start off with.
Thank you. I'm just going to unmute Mr. Shmuel so that he can just.
You hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Thank you on this presentation. And I want to ask you next question. How, according to your opinion, infrastructures can support resolution problems of poverty and social inequality?
Sorry, Trishant, could you please
Yeah,
repeat
sure.
the question?
So, how do you think infrastructure can support issues of poverty and social inequality?
Okay, that's a great question, Mr. Shamil. I think infrastructure is the core to answer poverty, because infrastructure is the primary, like, let's look at physical infrastructure first, be it housing, roads, electricity, water, any settlement, like our previous question when I answered, that is the basic for any settlement to survive. Now, we know housing in informal settlements for India is through the whole patta system. And from if you look at the history, there were many incidences where pattas were allocated to these urban informal settlements, and there are also incidents where many of them have not been given pattas and they suffer without housing. So if we just look at housing as an infrastructure here, we understand how it's important, because these people end up as encroachers and they live in temporary settlements, still hoping they can get a permanent house. This is just looking at housing. And this would be the same, and I could go on and on explaining about electricity and water and roads. And also, the primary core of this talk today is infrastructure is not just the physical elements like the roads or drainage or sewage and all of that, because that is something we all know about. And although I'm being critical of infrastructure here, I would also want to say that India has come a long way in providing these infrastructure to informal settlements. But again, I would not say that everybody is equally given this kind of infrastructure, but it has come across in a long way. And what I'm trying to put across in this talk really is that infrastructure is more than these physical aspects. It's the people really, and it's their time, and it's their social and emotional kind of elements. But yeah, it's a great question. So infrastructure, physical infrastructure is the first thing they have to get for them to survive. I mean, in fact, that's for anybody, any class. Let's not just look at informal settlements. For formal settlements as well, I mean, infrastructure, like you need, like say you're building a house in a elite neighborhood, all that you need is great water, great electricity, great lights, and all of that. So again, that's all infrastructure. So I think infrastructure is the core for any kind of urban living.
Yes, thank you very much. And another short question. I want to ask you what government and authorities of India do for navigating informal cities in India?
So, I mean, government does have some policies, had some policies over time. If we look at Hyderabad, we can go for as far as from 1994 when Mr. NTR was in power, and he's allocated a lot of pattas for the poor people. And it's from then when informal settlements have become more legal and visible in our Telugu states. But also, just on an Indian level, there has been so many policies from time to time to even take them into consideration, to give them housing, to provide them with the kind of identity they need, to give them, and all this, falls back to the kind of citizenship they get. Only when they have the identification and the place is when they get their citizenship. So I think it all ties in, and this is just one example that I've told you, but there have been many other policies. Um, Even in Delhi, like in when we had any big program like coming up, anything of a world level, of a global level, there's always a resettlement program towards the informal settlements to make them better. So there has been an effort from the government, but again, here I would say not very sure how much these policies are reaching to every informal settlement or how much they're helping to everyone in need. And also, sometimes these policies do not necessarily answer the people who are in need of them. Maybe it's because there's that top-down approach where you cannot directly reach the government. There's so many levels happen, so many level of people you have to go through in between. And also, you understand the Indian system. I don't want to get too much into it, Indian system of governance, because a lot could happen in between. And that being said, there could be a lot that can be done. And also, I think that's only possible when informal settlements are studied regularly, because I feel like informal settlements, the idea about bastis and slums is probably 10, 20 years old. Even if you look at literature and projects, there are not many latest projects or latest studies that happen in the global south. It's so important to study them time to time, because what I would have thought of informal settlements 10 years ago is very different from how informal settlements are now. If you walk into any of the bastis today, you will actually see that there are buildings that are 5 floors, there are buildings that are 3 floors, there are buildings with ACs, but that's saying they're also huts. So it's a very diverse space. So it's very important that we study these areas time to time to be able to give them the right kind of policies or solutions. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much on the answer.
Thank you, Shmit. Okay, moving on. I'm just going to read out some things from the chat box. A message from Vijay. I'm sorry, we're done with that. A statement by Maya. Urban sociologist's perspective is great, well presented. However, the gender perspective is looking at poor women only. Infrastructure affects genders of various economic categories too. Sure, there will be a series of talks by the same speaker covering this. I hope so too.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Maya. Obviously, just for this presentation, I'm focusing on a few threads, but also since my PhD is limited to a particular time, I have to focus on something very narrow. But that being said, also gender involves men also, and also gender involves women, like you said, and obviously women of different class, different categories, different kind of employment. Obviously, there's so much more to explore. That being said, I would really be interested to cover the other topics, but also this could be a great point where we could think these are areas that could be researched, and it would be great if more people come out and research these areas. These are actually gaps in our literature in the global south.
Very well answered. Thank you so much. I'm just gonna unmute Elisa, but just before that, I'm going to ask one more question from the chat box. It's really insightful and intriguing that what stops urban planners to incorporate these insights and plan a city which actually addresses issues that you've highlighted.
So I would say, I mean, people know about the situation, urban planners especially know about the current situation and what's happening on the ground. But again, now urban planners are not the only decision makers. It's something that's tied with multiple state actors. There is politicians, there's urban planners, and there's somebody else on the ground. And now, like, let's just assume GHMC in Hyderabad. They are the people on the ground who are actually collecting the data through the UCD department, that's the Urban Community Development Department. And they are the ones getting information from their ward offices. And that's what's being, this knowledge is being transferred to the urban planners. Now, an urban planner themselves would never step into these areas, into the informal settlements, for various reasons. Now, they really depend on the data they get from their subordinates, be from ward offices or whatever I just explained. When that happens, the information is actually very diluted. That's one problem. And the second problem is, even if they get a gist of what's happening on ground, to really put it on policy and do it, it's just not the urban planner. It's so much more. And there has to be an overall awareness in the system. And also, I think I spoke about women today. And this is something maybe we all know behind our heads, but it would also be something that would have thought, okay, it's not that important, or we know it, or she's just a maid. You obviously, most of you would be having an encounter with a maid in your house, in your office, somewhere, but we would have never thought of it, although we know it. So I think this research is more like, making the familiar. I'm just putting out what's familiar out there. This research is not something that's very strange or very scientific or very technical. It's something that's happening around us, what we can see but don't see. So if that's our response to it. And urban planners also have another level of constraint stopping them, but it would be great to get more insights from the ground level. Also, this is something that's happening in African context. A lot of settlements now involve local communities from the informal settlements to collect their data. They're employed as volunteers, they're given jobs, whatever salary. So that way, these informal settlements actually give the right amount and correct data to the government, and the government takes it up for their policy. This is happening currently in African context, and I'm sure it could happen in India too, but I'm just looking forward to a day that could happen.
Thank you for the answer. I too am optimistic about Indian government's action. All I see I live in Gujarat, and at the moment I've noticed there's any big sports functions or summits happening to environment or anything like that. Most of the slum areas, which are say close to the airports or the railway station, are basically curtained off from public view, which is really strange. Like they put up a massive hoarding or a series of curtains right in front of the slums. Instead of doing something for them or create a better space for them to accommodate themselves, which is okay. Moving on to the next one from Lisa. Elisa, could you please unmute yourself? Hello.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashwini, for such an insightful narrative. I'm not an urban planner, but I'm a gender and inclusion expert, and this is something which I work in urban areas. This is something which we experience most of our working life. But I like your fresh perspective, narrating this story from a different perspective. And as a researcher, as a sociologist, what would be top 3 recommendations for the government? Because that's something, again, which we struggle with. So I know from this perspective, and I would like to hear something fresh from you, because from your narrative, I think you'll be able to, come up a different perspective. So what would be your top 3 recommendations for the government?
Thank you, Elisa, for your question. And before I answer your question, I will have to say I'm only an urban planner and an urban sociologist. I study the feminist urban ecology only. I don't get too much into the gender studies, saying that obviously you are more experienced and you have more expertise on the gender aspect of it. But I am only trying to study gender through the urban aspects. But that saying, it is so important that gender as women become visible in policies. And I don't think I have the I have I mean I can give recommendations at this stage to the government, but if you ask me from my research perspective, I would only say that number one, for women to be more visible in policies in urban areas, that is, I did, as a part of my fieldwork, I did interview some state officials, that be it GHMC officials or some politicians. They believe that they're doing a lot for women. That is, when I asked them what exactly they're doing, they said about the toilets that they're providing. They do mention toilets, but on the ground, these toilets are something that cannot be used. Um, these toilets are usually logged or sometimes converted into small tea shops, and then people use it for their own purposes. So I think what's really important is to see what's happening on ground, although there's a proposal, to see if it's really being implemented for the purpose it's supposed to be implemented. Two, like I said earlier, it is very important to get the real data from the ground. So either having a transparent, inclusive kind of system where people could maybe log into an app and say, okay, this is what's happening in our settlement, or like what's happening globally, employ youth who are in these informal settlements, give them incentives. This would also encourage them to be educated or to get into job or get into formal roles. There's so much that can be done, right from mapping their settlement to tell what's happening in the settlement. So these people can be volunteers. I mean, a lot of NGOs are doing it, but again, there are some limitations to it. But when it comes from a government scale, it's going to be very different. That being said, from a gender perspective, there are so many aspects that I did not cover. I'm talking about a settlement in Hyderabad, in the core of the city, and not every house or every hut has a toilet. Some of the women still go to the corners, dark spaces under the trees to relieve themselves. This is something happening in 2025. And this is not something a lot of people know about. They just assume that, okay, now everybody has toilets. Now they have a water connection. What's the problem? There's still a problem. So the real recommendation here is to study the ground as it's as closest to reality to the date.
I hope that answers your question, Lisa. Hello.
Yeah. Thank you, Ashwini. I can fully understand the thing about toilets because we work in the space of wash. So I can fully understand the reality that is happening. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before I move on to the next question, I'd like to officially close the talk and given details for the upcoming talk next week so that people can register. We have G.N. Padmaja as our speaker next week, and she's an environment evangelist, sustainability educator, co-founder of Earth Loopers. She's talking about why forests and wildlife matter more than ever. The talk is on 31st May from 11 a.m. to 12. You can find the link in the chat box. Also, if you've missed any part of this particular session, you can go to the YouTube live section of Vishwa Talks page and you can refer to the previous main speaking part. Thank you, Rakesh, for sharing your screen. I'm going to move on to the next question. And before I move on to the next one, I'd like to ask a question. So I heard you say that you spent about 6 months in the bastis in Hyderabad. So you probably spent a lot of time amongst individuals. And a lot of these individuals basically are labor for the hyper materialistic urbanization that we are doing in the cities. And what do you think they aspire to be? Would they like to live in concrete jungles? Would they like to live in these buildings that they're building, or they'd rather go back to farms and farm and live in a jungle or something like that?
Okay, to answer your question, Srishant, most of these people living in the informal settlements are migrants, mostly from Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, but also from Bihar, Assam, and other places in India. They move from their villages primarily to make a better living or to earn better. And in most cases, these are families of men who lost everything in their villages, maybe due to their habits or don't have a land, but also saying that there are so many people who sell their land and farms in the villages and come to Hyderabad with money. And these are the people who build multi-story buildings in the bastis. So if you actually walk into any basti around you, you will see it's very diverse. You will actually see, I would not say apartments, but 4 to 5 floor buildings. And they are trying to rent them, make money out of them. And it's actually a better living for them because they're making more money compared to their villages. Now, if you ask them if they want to go back to farming, I think no, because they're finding more money and financial help here. And also, that being said, a lot of these people work as domestic help. They work in retail stores or in small time firms or even small IT firms, the younger generation. Now, the salary they're being paid is sometimes much higher. Like, I was an architect and I worked as an architect. I've employed architects as junior architects. And I know some of these domestic workers are paid much more than my junior architects. So here's the thing. I don't think they want to go back because in a city like Hyderabad, domestic work is being paid good enough. Also, it has its drawbacks. Again, there's a whole big discussion we can have on the gender work dynamics and work dynamics, how they're treated there. And, sometimes it's exploitation. Sometimes they get favors from their employers, like they get credit, or sometimes they pay their school fees, the kids' school fees, or their hospital charges. But again, it's a very exploitive kind of relationship. So it's as much as these people need the elite society, the elite society also needs them. So it's a very, I would say, interdependent relation. And also, if you ask me if they would want to live in such buildings, I would say it's already happening. The idea for everybody, the kind of mobility they picture in the bastis is to move from a hut to a pakka house to a multi-story building where they can live in one portion and rent out the others. So they're also actually great business mechanism here because they're thinking about passive income while
All the
they're
time.
active. Yeah. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to move on to the question from Divyendu Lohar, and right after it, I'm going to come to you, Puna. How does infrastructure reinforce or challenge traditional gender roles in everyday life?
So that's a great question. I think that's the core of my PhD, my research. We could just take water. That is something that that's the core of my research. So, like, just say water is something that women need to run their family, run their everyday life. Like I mentioned, it's the responsibility of the woman to collect this water. Now, see, some women do not have a tap connection at home. They have to go to a public borewell, collect water, come back home. Some women have a tap connection at home. Still, they will have to collect water and also allocate the kind of water they get. They get water every alternate day, which is not sufficient for their everyday uses. So they ration the water in certain ways. Okay, this amount is water. This amount of water is for like cooking. This amount of water is for my cleaning. And this amount of water is when I wash my clothes. So that kind of burden again falls on women. Now, you may also say, like I told you, that the bastis are very diverse now. There are also multi-story buildings where they dig bore wells and they have tanks. Now, the problem with bore wells is, again, there's so many rhythms that the basti goes through. We can just think about seasons. Now, in summers in Hyderabad, the situation is such that even the bore wells go dry. So irrespective of some families spending 2 lakh rupees on getting a bore well, they still don't have water. They still have to go back and rely on a public tank because it's summer, it's dry season, and that's what urbanization is doing to our areas with too much population living in one building. And the bigger problem with Bastis is that there's a lot of people living in a small footprint compared to the other areas of the city. So there's a lot of usage of water or other kind of infrastructure. So every class and every kind of family in the Basti is being affected with infrastructure, and the burden mostly falls on women, because you could also relate to it. A lot of times, the role of cooking or cleaning or something in the family falls on the mother, or that's there. In my field work, I spoke to some men. I asked them, okay, what time is the water coming today? And as casually as they said, oh, we don't know, it's the women's department, it's my wife's department. So that whole department of it being of a woman's is how they believe it, portray it. That's how it's embedded in the system, that this falls into the woman's category. Water is a huge topic that we could talk on and on about, but this is just one way, one example I'm explaining this to you with. Again, there's so much more we can talk about: sanitation and electricity and all of that. Hope I answer your question.
Thank you. I'm gonna unmute Ms. Poonam. Kindly unmute yourself. Hello. Hello.
Hi. Yeah. First of all, congratulations for a wonderful theme that we're discussing. So my question, what I want to see, I am myself Professor of Urban Geography and Urban Planning. So women see the open spaces in the cities, the public spaces in the cities, right? So how safe, which I feel are not really safe for women to use the public spaces in the same manner as the other gender. That's one. The second thing, my observation as a matter of concern, that all these migratory labor section, particularly women at various construction sites, maybe the roads or different construction sites. So again, the hygiene facilities, particularly the toilet facilities for the women, are not available. So, when on such major projects are happening, whether it's a road, laying of roads or highways, etc. But what I feel, so whichever these infrastructure projects, the women construction laborers are there, the companies which are having the tender for doing these, they must ensure that as a part of the quotation, that for the female workers, the construction workers, at least a basic facility of toilet should be there.
Yeah, I mean, that's great insights from you, Ms. Poonam. For your first question, if public spaces are really safe for women, I would say no. Like you said, it's not really safe. Let me just talk about the informal settlement, since that's my study area. I can talk about the entire city, but for now, let me talk just about this. These women actually navigate just their everyday routes in different ways. As in, when it's dark, not every street has street lights. I mean, this is the case in an informal settlement, something you can assume it is like. But again, also not many places in the city are well lit or they're designed for women as such. So women generally avoid these areas, plan a different route where they feel they're safer, or they try to go in company, as in they try to maybe take a friend, a neighbor, or daughter, somebody along with them wherever they want to go. Again, this should not be the case. This should not be the situation. This should not be a situation where a woman is feeling safe only when she has somebody with her, or when she doesn't have somebody. The point is, women are showing agency, they are showing resilience, but again, I would not use resilience in a very great way. They're showing this kind of agency because they have no other choice. If there's nobody with them, they still walk, still go, still do stuff they have to do, still work. But again, there's that whole emotional labor that they go through, which has to be answered. And again, infrastructure is the first thing that can solve this, just with the right kind of lighting, right kind of street lights, And even in public areas, there's like in an informal settlement, there's so many street corners and pockets where men sit in groups drinking alcohol, and then women are uncomfortable to walk around them. Just, I mean, policing such kind of corners, and maybe making it well lit. If it's well lit, men themselves wouldn't feel that comfortable to sit there and drink openly in public. So I think infrastructure has the main and primary role to solve this problem, to make public spaces much safer. Also, it's not just infrastructure, I understand, but at least something that can be done at step one should be infrastructure. And I think your second question was about toilets in a lot of construction sites. I totally agree with you. It'll be great to have a policy like that. But also, you're talking about construction sites, and I'm talking about permanent informal settlements, permanent bastis. Even there, women still do not have toilets at home or public toilets, and they still go out to some corner on everyday basis, and they've been living there for decades. And they've been living there in hope of a house, in a hope that either they would get a 2-bedroom government scheme or they would get a patta, and they're still in that hope. So I would say the hope of the woman didn't die even after 10-20 years. But again, there is a lot of state absence that we see here, which has to be answered. But on the other hand, when I did take this matter to some of the state officials during my field work, they believed that most women and most houses had toilets. So on the contrary, something else is happening on the ground. So again, this brings back to my point that it is very important to document the right kind of situation of what's happening on the ground. I think that's where the transparency is lacking. Sorry, I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read out some things from the chat box. There's something written by Shruti. Hey there, really great talk. Loved your framework conceptualized around women as a part and parcel of infrastructure when the state fails at protecting women in their day-to-day lives. As a sociologist, I am researching primary healthcare institutions and the care economy of gendered caste labor in India. I have been thinking something similar in terms of female frontline workers in rural India and how they possibly become immersed in the failing infrastructure of primary healthcare delivery and end up becoming pillars upholding the crumbling physical infrastructure in these contexts as well. I wonder if you may have any thoughts on this.
Absolutely, Shruti. I resonate with everything you're doing. I think it's great, but also I think so far my expertise has only been with urban areas. I do understand urban and rural areas might have very similar dynamics, but also the kind of aspirations and the livelihood people would have would be quite different. I'm afraid I might not have any kind of direct insights for you, but I'll be great to connect with you maybe later, and maybe have a chat with you to see if we have something in common, and I can definitely share that with you.
Okay, I'm just gonna. Okay, and there's a question from Shreya. Are there any pointers, notes available for today's amazing session? Let me get that one. Ma'am, I'm posting a link for the YouTube video of this particular webinar. You can refer to the previous pointers made. We'll also be sharing the PPT along with you right after, like post the webinar. And I'll also give you the email details of the speaker so that you can reach out to them with your queries. There's a lot of testimonials and a lot of different statements. One from Priyanka. Ma'am, I'm from Chennai, and here there was an initiative to shift people from different slums and housing them in a place called Kanaginagar, which is pretty much outside the city. So these initiatives to housing them away also alienates them. like most people moved are domestic workers, it's impossible to commute, and the place has too many crimes happening. Adding to that, this is something that happens in almost all the cities, including mine. Um, the government gives a lot of daily wage workers places to live, a 1 BHK or a 2 BHK flat in a government building under a scheme. Most of the times what happens is these domestic workers have to travel so far that they actually rent out the flat that has been given to them by the government, and then they go make another shack close to the place where they're working, and then continue their stuff. How do you counter this? How do you deal with it?
I mean, absolutely. This is a situation happening in every city. This is happening in Hyderabad as well, very actively. But again, there's two sides to a coin, to every coin. So one is this: definitely they're being placed in a far off space, and then there's a lot of travel costs, and work. They wouldn't find work as much as living in the center of the city. But the good side to it is they have a house if they really want. They don't have to stay in a shack or a hut or any of that without any kind of provisions. But the downside to it is a lot of people from the informal settlement are still waiting for these houses, and the number is huge, the number of people waiting for these kind of housing. So, I mean, there's everything happening. People are still waiting. People given houses are, like you said, renting them out and then moving back and encroaching in a different area. So people want livelihood, but also cities are expanding at a rapid speed. There are more communities moving on the outside as well. What could be unsafe today and what could look like an outskirt of a city today could be developed very fast, depending on what kind of a city it is. Like, say, take Hyderabad, for example. Hyderabad was just permitted to a certain radius earlier, and now it has expanded so rapidly. Now, if you see like Mokila, or if you see like, I don't know, movie towers or something, is so much construction and so much residential area. Now people were given housing there initially, and they all rented it out and moved back to the city. Versus now, if they go back, they have a lot of domestic work available for them around it. So yeah, it's, I think at that point, at that moment, it's about temporality again, how it could help.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question. What policy level interventions can the government implement, or rather should the government implement, to influence attitudes and perceptions around gender bias and gender suppression among individuals living in these areas?
Yeah, like I answered earlier, there is a lot the government could do, but also at this point, I am not in a situation to give these kind of recommendations to the government, but definitely would be something that I would want to look forward in the future. But I think the first step should be inclusivity, that is having more people from these informal settlements, maybe even collect data or produce data, because in that way, there's more transparency in the data, and maybe it could be closer to the ground reality. And also the whole stigma of a higher level official entering these areas, there's a lot of stigma around it. They will usually send somebody, their subordinates or somebody at a very lower position into these bastis to collect data or find it out and come. But I would say the first step is to break the stigma to enter these spaces. I mean, I have done an ethnographic study in one of the informal settlements for 6 months, and I was absolutely fine. I am absolutely fine. I'm doing the talk today, so it's all right. Only because I've done this ethnographic study is the reason why I know what's happening in there, and I know what's happening with these people. So I think the first thing is to get rid of the stigma and get into these areas. I know when you say you're from the government or from a particular political party, people do not welcome you as much because, again, they're as scared because they don't want whatever they have to be gone. Because, as you know, informal settlements, the kind of housing and all of that, although the land given to them is official, but the kind of constructions and all is not very legal. They're just trying to make an income from what they have. So I think it's both way. When one, the government should employ people who do not have stigma to go into these areas and study it. And again, hopefully these are the people who are educated, trained in this background, who can collect actual data. And two, more people from the informal settlements being employed, maybe as volunteers or any of that. And three, I think the whole idea of stigma is so big that is something that has to go. It definitely cannot go overnight, but it's something that can be worked on. And also, I mean, it might be a little irrelevant, but I think even media and movies, how they portray informal settlements is so, so important. Like, I think about Hyderabad and informal settlements, and I am a Telugu speaking girl. I've lived in Hyderabad for almost all my life. I always connect back to this movie Vedam, where Allu Arjun was like portrayed as a person living in one of the informal settlements. And a lot of stigma on how he's portrayed, as in he was portrayed in a very right way, how people are living there. But again, there are other aspects to it. And also, this movie was something that came out many years ago, maybe in 2007, 2009. I might be wrong, but sometime around that time. So I think how media portrays these informal settlements is also so important, and especially for a country like India, where we rely so much on movies for our information and so much on the popular media for our information.
Thank you. The next question is from architect Bhimesh. How do you respond to the provisions made in the norms for development projects to share a fraction for EWS housing, the present scenario and success rate of the same?
So actually, to answer your question, I'm not sure about the exact proportion of the provision in the policy exactly. I haven't looked into the policy at a housing scale because my project was more related to the people.
Okay, he's mentioned a few chats ahead. I am referring to real estate projects, by the way.
Right. So, I mean, as important as the question sounds, I might not be able to answer it because it's a little out of my study area.
Miss Meena has asked in the chat box if she could speak. I'm just going to try and unmute. Ma'am, could you please unmute yourself? I'm just going to prompt you to unmute. Yeah.
Okay. Hello.
Hello.
I'm Meena Harisinghani, and I'm
Yes.
from Pune. Thank you very much, Yashashri. That was a wonderful talk. My background is with English literature, so I thoroughly enjoyed your talk, and not just for what you were trying to convey, but for the sheer poetry of the way you put words together. Very, very powerful. Thank you so much. I've stayed in the area that I stay in for the past 35 years, and I've seen my maids' basti and what has happened with their lives from her stories and from the stories of her neighbors. Earlier I used to see my maid's life as very disheartening. It always seemed to me that there was no light at the end of the road. She had a husband who was a drunkard, and that was the story of many women over there. And whatever she earned just went down the drain. So her situation constantly kept getting worse. Though I should not say it, but I think it came as a blessing to her when her husband passed away, and her life changed. Her life changed. Her children completed school, but not too much. Not too much was happening. Later on, they got gas cylinders in the house. She did not have to come to the hills, which are right behind our house, to collect firewood. And many women like her stopped coming, so our forest was also saved. There was also a toilet introduced, and she, she had also had a terrible accident and a fracture. So the toilet in her house was such a wonderful thing for her that she could go to the toilet. Her basti also learnt about garbage separation, and the women took charge, became great. And over these 35 years, their salaries took a jump up, which helped them to buy things that they needed, send their children to better schools. And now that I see the third generation, I'm 71 years old now, so I'm seeing the third generation, her grandchildren, who, their lives are very aspirational, very aspirational. Now, this I know is not the story everywhere, but I could see how now that their homes are better equipped, they don't have to stand in line. The fights with the neighbors have reduced at the water tap. The sort of misery of going to a public toilet is totally out of their lives. The time they spent in collecting firewood has gone. The scolding that they got from people staying around the hill, the environmentalists who saying, "Nahi lakdi mat kaato," that is out of their lives. So, at least in what I have seen, I see good times coming slowly, very slowly, but a lot of it has also come not out of government policy and intervention of other people, but out of their own efforts, and out of their own volition. And they're wanting life to be different. So I know that they want the lives of their grandchildren to be so much different from their own lives, and they work towards it. And they try, they ask questions, they want to save money, they're looking at money differently now, not just hand to mouth, but they are interested in saving. They're interested in planning for the future. So these are very hopeful things. And I would agree with Yashaswini that the kind of space somebody is put in affects a lot of things about their lives. I had worked with an NGO where we were working on this project of Behtar School. And some of the schools I had visited where there was no toilet, the entire, like passage somehow. At the end of the passage, the children would pee and everything would sort of come into the corridor, which was, it was horrible. It was horrible. And now that the school has toilets, the girls have toilets, girls would have to hold on for so long. So now I see that place as a better thing because of projects like, Behtar School, which said, puts child in a good space. And you will see something nice happening to the child. If you put a child or any person in a demeaning space, it will demean him. So thank you very much, Yashaswini, and I do look forward to a book from you.
Thank you, ma'am, for that. That's the target. The aim is to get a book out of this.
Okay.
But
You
also,
can use my editorial services.
definitely.
Okay.
Also, I agree to everything you said. And also, there's a lot of resilience and agency from the women, like I told you. Again, not necessarily because they want to, but because they don't have a choice. Women also portray a lot of agency. But also saying that, I would say problems that were, the kind of problems 20 years ago are, I feel like, obsolete now. There are different kind of problems coming up in the informal settlements. So definitely, there's been much improvement than the earlier decades, but also there's so much more that has to be done. I'm so glad that your
Yes.
maid has been able to come till wherever she has come, but also there's maybe so much more her neighbors are going through, or maybe there are different aspects of issues that she's going through now. And she might actually feel much more relieved compared to earlier because she's been through worse. Just because she's better now doesn't mean she doesn't have any problems. She could be having other issues, and that could be, issues most bastis in India are going through now in like 2025 or will go through in the future.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're muted, Trisha.
Thank you, Meena ma'am. I'm a big fan of citizens from Pune because there's a really nice sort of awareness that they have about their surroundings, and also the citizen activism is off the hook. Like they stand up for everything that's happening in the city, and that's really cool. And your insights help us understand what happened in the last few decades. Your first-hand experience helps us a lot. Thank you so much, Meena ma'am. Moving on to the last question in the chat box. I'm not sure if it is a question, but I'm just going to read it out. As someone from a technical background, I'm interested in understanding how technology can be leveraged to enhance women's safety, monitor public spaces, collect real-time data, and promote positive behavioral change. Specifically, what strategies can be adopted to develop surveillance systems, mobile applications to engage with children and teens in slum areas, and digital platforms that empower them through education and skill building for a better future.
I think it's a great thought. This is something happening in Indian cities. In the formal part of the city, with their she teams, they have these kind of technology and apps with, where girls and women can give the real-time data. But this is something lacking in informal settlements. It'll be a great initiative because also there's there's a lot of usage of mobile phones now, and everybody has data and internet. It'll be great to have something like this also, but for this to work out, women in the informal settlements have to be trained to come out and voice their opinions. Otherwise, irrespective of giving them an app or any kind of platform, they wouldn't voice it out. The primary step is to give them that kind of confidence that they can voice out their opinion. Also, it's so important to give them it's so important for them to know that they're being heard and their opinion and voice matters. So that's something that can be looked into. But again, technology can be used in multiple ways. Even my PhD project, which is much smaller compared to so much more that can be done, I've done mapping through a software and a platform called EpiCollect, where I have taken real-time data from the ground, because informal settlements are not very clearly mapped in our formal maps on GIS or any of the maps. So I had to map the settlement that I was working on in terms of what kind of housing it had, or what kind of infrastructure it had, where it had, and all of that. And EpiCollect was really useful. I could take pictures, put in the location, the GPS location, and write in notes. And this was very helpful for me. So this is one tool that's available, and there's so much more available, so much more that can be done in our Indian context as well, which will make it much easier, one, for policymakers and people who want to work on informal settlements, and two, for the people inside as well to, help be a part of this process.
Thank you, Yashaswini. Apologies. I think we're done with all the questions in the chat box. And I'm going to send you a copy of the chat, because there's a lot of interesting testimonials in the chat box itself and a lot of recommendations for topics too. Message from Shreya to do a talk on international relations. Okay, we'll look into that now. Thank you. Okay, there's another question that has just come in. How to educate the policy makers and political parties for planning gender inclusive schemes? How textbooks can include the gender sensitization aspect?
Okay, so to the first point, how to educate policymakers and political parties, I think it has to be a part of their agendas. And I would also want to say that women are so important for political parties, because during elections, you see that they rely on women, they talk to women, they try to be a part of their routine. Like, I would just take example of Hyderabad. They have a lot of, they want to make the women happy, like be it through giving them free saris during Bonalu, or other kind of incentives. So they do know that women matter, but I think it'll be important for them to also actually address their actual needs and make sure they work towards their benefit, and any way they could make them more inclusive, be it in their policy, or even a lot of women from the ground who are active politically as well in the lower roles, they get affiliated with these political parties, go around. I've had one case study of a woman, very interesting case study. She's been associated with almost all the political parties in power in Hyderabad for the last 30, 40 years on the ground. She goes with them for all their rallies, all their meetings. Even during the Telangana bifurcation, she's put into jail because of her protests and all of that. And I spoke to her in 2024. I had a long interview with her for 2.5 hours, and she was venting out saying, irrespective of so many years of being with the political party and the particular politician, she was never given a formal role of any kind. Whereas the men who started with her or the men who started after her were given a position. And obviously, she told me it's not the position she's working for, but she deserves it because she's been working for so long. So this is something we have to look into as well, to give equal importance to women. I'm not saying everyone, but at least for the people who are working in it, towards it. And for your second question, how textbooks can indicate this, I'm not sure if textbooks itself can have a chapter on this, but at least having workshops in schools and something more interactive where students can also be interested in it rather than just reading it in a textbook. They could also be, there are a lot of schools in these informal settlements. You could even have some kind of an exchange program, I believe, what usually schools would do with like other countries, but they could also do it with the informal settlements too. I mean, both ways, the students from the informal settlements would understand what's happening in the private schools, and in the private schools, students would understand what's happening in informal settlements. And obviously, when you're going through a school, there's a kind of safety and the students are pretty safe, but there's that kind of awareness that's happening, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we are done with all the questions in the chat box as well. And I really thank you for your patience and time and all the insights that you've given us. And we'd love to have you again on Vishwa Talks, catering to a different topic. Meanwhile, okay, so I'm just gonna ask Rakesh to project a breakout room link to you. You'll see the link on your screen shortly. Kindly join into the link and I'll be there with you shortly. I'd like to thank all of the participants who've been with us up until now. If you've missed any part of the session, I've already posted the link of the talk in the chat. If you have any queries that you've not asked here and would like to reach out to the speaker directly, here is the email address in the chat box and you can reach out to the speaker. Also, we will be sharing the PPT and the email details in an email to you after the main talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. And I hope to connect with anybody who's interested to continue the conversation. Thank you so much.
For more details about future events, kindly go to our website, vishwa.org. You can also check out the details or the promotions for the talks on our Instagram page and our Facebook. So you can join in if you find the topic interesting. Also, you can recommend topics to us via email or also recommend speakers to us. Thank you so much. I will see you next week at 11 a.m.